And you'll be and God can save that person, and you need to pray for that end. Well, as I said before, my strong point has never been strong salvation, soul winning. I used to do a lot of it when I was younger and in my early years in ministry. It was the thing that we're supposed to do, is to go door to door and knock on doors, and every time we come someplace we talk about Christ. And if I pull in a gas station, I would go to a Shell gas station. I said, you know what you're going to go if you're not saved if you take the S off of that Shell sign? We have revivals, and we'd go out and the preacher would get up on the stand. He says, you need all be quiet, I'm going to pray. I remember that some church had an activity out in one of the parks, and it was a park, and it was a public park, and it was a big place, and he got up to pray, and he said, everybody here, I want you to shut up for a few minutes because I'm going to pray. That didn't go over very well, neither was it right. So we've had our methods of trying, because we have an urge to see people saved. We do a lot of silly things. There's a right way and there's a wrong way, and if there's a wrong way, I've done them all. But have a burden for lost people is very important, and how we do that is very different. And I had an opportunity to talk to a young man this week. And in a general conversation, he shared with me his life story. Now, for a young man to share his life story with me, knowing I was a preacher, I felt that he had some confidence. And my comment, and we were in a situation where we did not, I told Charity, I should have said, you know, what we really need is to sit down and talk about your salvation and the Lord. You build confidence up in a person, but you don't want to jump on him. You don't want to jump on him as soon as he says something, or you lose him. You build relationships and get him to talk to you, and then if God leads, you can share with him the gospel in many different ways. And oftentimes we don't do it like we should. Now, why is that? This church could be filled with people that you've led to Christ. There's nowhere in the Bible, and listen to me carefully, the Bible doesn't demand and command a lost person to come to church. A lost person is never asked to come to church, worship. You go throughout the Old Testament, the tabernacle, the temple was never meant for lost people to go into the tabernacle or the temple. They were to be outside the camp. And if they brought lost people into the camp, they had problems. God cannot have fellowship with lost people. Does that mean we don't have lost people here? Of course we do. But they can come and listen, but they can't be a part of our church. But I'm just saying is, God wants us to share with them the gospel before they come to church. And then we bring them into the church so they can see what salvation really is. The Apostle Paul was doing that. The Apostle Paul went into the synagogues, and he went into and built churches based on people who were saved. And I'm sure we want to see our loved ones saved. And I share with you that we should have the responsibility and the care that we want to see them saved. You should never say to a person who you question their salvation, and you should say, we need to sit down and talk about what God needs to do in our lives, so forth. Well, the Apostle Paul in Romans chapter 9. So Paul also has something very important to say to us in chapter 9 and verse 1 and 2. And why is it? He said in verse 2 that I have great heaviness and continue sorrow in my heart. If there ever is a phrase that creates in a believer's heart the desire to see people saved, is verse 2. The Apostle Paul said, that I have great heaviness and continued sorrow in my heart. He really felt this. A heart attitude so deep. He really loved these people. Not bitter against the Jewish people, but broken over them. He calls upon the Spirit to attest of the integrity of his heart. Great grief, unceasing anguish, great pain, great weight of sorrow, consistently in pain or distress, was verse 2 teaches us. Perhaps that's what creates the spirit of being a missionary in some people's hearts. Can I share with you a person who does not have a love to see people saved will never go to a mission field where there is no gospel presented? Okay. A person that does not have any love for lost people will never go outside their rank and share the gospel if they really do not have love. And sometimes I question my own love for the lost. Maybe sometimes I just take it for granted. Maybe I don't have that genuine love for people that are lost. But the Apostle Paul did. While I am rejoicing in the fellowship with my God, the Apostle Paul said, I am continually in pain, this unending sorrow in my heart, the sincerity and strength of this sorrow for Israel. I want to see them saved. Verse 3. For I would wish that myself were accursed from Christ for my brethren, my kinsmen, according to the flesh. This man was a great evangelist. I think that is the reason Alan Harris has spent 30 years of his life from the time he was in my youth department class. He had a desire to preach the gospel in an evangelistic way. He had a love for Christ. I remember when we were in Wooster, Ohio, Bill Reinhardt, Dave Grigger, Dennis Collette, and many others, Arthur Begley, many of their wives today. They would come over to the house and they would say, I have a loved one that needs to be saved. Teenagers. Let's go visit them. We'd get into Bill's Volkswagen. He still got the same Volkswagen he had in 1971. He still got, and he sells Volkswagens now. He sells about 30 a month. He was pastoring for a great deal of time and something happened, whatever, but nevertheless he is still teaching in a class, which is terrific. And he sells Volkswagen on the side and he still loves the Lord. And he said, there's some people that I want to see saved. And we'd go out and visit the young people. We'd have activities, the Word of Life, and we had the Word of Life basketball team. And we had to have, if we had 12 people on the team, 6 of them had to be lost. You had to get people on your team that was lost, that needed to be saved, and then we'd have a big tournament, and then when the tournament was over, we'd have fellowship and preach the gospel. There was never a time in Wooster or any other place that we'd have big things for our class, and we went out to have the first skating party. And I said, this is a church skating party. Bring anybody you want, except you can't wear, girls, you can't wear jeans. That was funny. Nobody showed up. But anyway, and this was back in 80, 79. And as soon as it was all over with, I said, now let's all sit down. We'll come and I'm going to preach the gospel. We never ever had an activity in our youth department class, no matter how, and it was a lot of lost people there, and we presented the gospel. That's the way it ought to be. This man was a great evangelist because he had a heart of God. Evangelism is the key heart of God. That's the heart of it all. It isn't methods. There are 100 methods that we can use to try to get a person saved. Man, I've got to get in the Roman road here real quick. You're talking to somebody and you say, I've got to get the Roman road in. I used to say to a person, we'd go to Dairy Queen in Texas, and I'd see somebody and I said, have you ever given any thought to spiritual things? You don't say that today. Well, yes, I've been listening to Oprah. She's a spiritualist. I like to have that kind of spiritualist thing. I've been reading Mrs. Williams' book. I mean, I've been talking to Roman Downey. I've taken her spiritual psychology class. That's what happened today. In those days, they didn't have any of that stuff. Right. It's not method that wins a person to Christ. It's your love that you have to want to see people saved. Right. If we would claim to love Christ and love souls and desire their salvation, if we really loved like Paul, loved and could call Christ and affirm that, and the Spirit would affirm that, we would turn this world upside down. That's what happened to Paul. He had such a love for Christ, he had such a love for lost people, that he was willing to get beat up, knocked down, beaten, shipwrecked, thrown out of town, rocked almost to death, and get right back up and go again. Because he had such a love for lost people. I can't say I love souls until I can call up Christ and affirm my conscience and truly love souls is true. Sometimes we just get a little quiet in our thinking. There's probably never a time I'm around somebody and I'm not saying, I wonder if they're saved. I wonder if they truly know the Lord. And sometimes I get timid. I was at Kroger's, another Kroger store. I'm quit going to Kroger's with my shirt and tie. 7 days a week I have a tie. I dress up. I go to Kroger's the other day, and I walk in and I see, when you go in that store, they're lined up inside, waiting for a taxi, waiting for somebody to pick them up, waiting for somebody. And there's 4 or 5 people lined up inside there as I go through into the main section. And I see this one person is sitting there, and she's all bundled up and got her cart full of groceries there. And I thought, that's kind of interesting. So I go in and I come back out, and she's got her coat off. She said, can you take me home? Now, I didn't play a trick on her. I said, I'll meet you at the car. I didn't do that. And I said, are you kidding me? And what I should have done was, I said, ma'am, can I just share with you Christ? Ma'am, you should say, ma'am, sir, you don't have to take me home. But I mean, I'm serious. Did that person make me Christ? Do we care enough about a person to share with them Christ? Inappropriate or not appropriate? You see people you see people on the road and you want to give them tracts, you want to help them, you want to do something like that. The Apostle Paul had a place and time to go and do that. I'm sure he did that. But can I share with you that an unceasing pain and sorrow like John Knox said through tears, John Knox said this, give me Scotland or, oh God, or I die.